The first time Rowan Blackthorne heard his maid's stomach growl louder than the grandfather clock in his dining hall, he realized hunger could sound like grief. He followed her that night, expecting secrets. What he found instead shattered 6 centuries of carefully preserved emptiness. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. Rowan Blackthorne had mastered stillness long before the world learned electricity. It was the kind of stillness that came from surviving centuries without letting anyone see too much, feel too much, or matter too much. His estate sat high above Ashford Ridge, Oregon, wrapped in mist and pine, glass and steel blending seamlessly with old stone. To the world, he was a reclusive investor with an inherited fortune and peculiar habits. To himself, he was a vampire who had learned that the safest way to exist among humans was to remain untouched by them. That philosophy had worked flawlessly for decades, until Lyra Belmont arrived. She came with impeccable references, a soft voice, and eyes that noticed everything while pretending to notice nothing at all. Light-skinned, warm-toned, with dark hair she always kept neatly tied back, Lyra moved through the mansion like a gentle breeze, never loud, never disruptive, yet somehow changing the temperature of every room she entered. Rowan had hired her because she was efficient. He kept her because she was quiet, too quiet. Every evening followed the same ritual. Rowan sat at the long dining table beneath a chandelier older than the state itself. Lyra placed the meal before him, always perfect, always hot, and then stepped back, folding her hands behind her as if she were part of the furniture. "You're not eating?" Rowan asked one night, glancing up from a plate he had no intention of touching. Lyra smiled quickly, a practiced smile, and rubbed her stomach. "I'm bloated, sir." The lie might have passed any other employer, but Rowan wasn't human. He heard the growl immediately, low, hollow, desperate. Hunger echoing from a body that had learned to be polite about pain. Something unpleasant stirred in his chest. "You should sit," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I'm fine," she replied, already stepping back. Rowan watched her retreat, the sound of her hunger following her like an accusation. He told himself it was none of his concern. Humans were fragile creatures with fragile problems. He had learned long ago not to interfere. Yet the next day, he noticed something else. Lyra packed food, not carelessly, not greedily, carefully. She wrapped bread in napkins, tucked fruit into her bag, and folded leftovers with reverence, as though each crumb mattered. She did it when she thought she was alone. Rowan stood at the top of the staircase, unmoving, watching. That night, when Lyra clocked out and walked down the long gravel driveway toward the main road, Rowan waited exactly 30 seconds before following her. He moved silently, keeping to the shadows, his senses tuned not to danger, but to her. Her footsteps were light, but tired. She walked past bus stops and closed shops, deeper into the lower end of Ashford Ridge, where the manicured streets gave way to cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights. She didn't go home. She turned instead toward Lowell Cross. Rowan slowed as recognition dawned. Lowell Cross was a pocket of neglect the city liked to forget. Aging buildings, underfunded clinics, families surviving on hope and stubbornness. He had passed through it once, decades ago, and never returned. Lyra walked with purpose now. She stopped in front of a narrow, run-down house with peeling paint and a sagging porch. Laughter drifted out, thin, weak, but real. Rowan froze at the edge of the street, unseen. Lyra knocked once and stepped inside. Rowan moved closer. Through a cracked window, he saw them. Children. Too thin. Too pale. One coughed so hard Rowan instinctively tensed, every predatory instinct screaming that something was wrong. They lay on thin mattresses, wrapped in worn blankets, eyes lighting up when Lyra entered as though the sun itself had arrived. "You're late," a little girl teased, her voice hoarse. "I had to trick my boss," Lyra said lightly, kneeling. "He thinks I'm always full." Rowan felt the words like a blow. Lyra unpacked the food slowly, smiling, making jokes, breaking bread into careful portions. She handed everything out, everything. When the last piece was gone, she wiped her hands on her apron and pretended not to notice her own trembling. She didn't eat, not a bite. Later, Rowan followed her again as she left the house, her steps slower now. She stopped beneath a flickering street lamp and opened her palm. Coins. A few bills. Not much. Her hand shook. She walked to a pharmacy. Rowan stood across the street as she counted and recounted, whispering to herself, before sliding the money across the counter. Medicine changed hands. Relief flickered across her face like a small miracle. That was when Rowan stepped out of the shadows. "You haven't eaten all day," he said quietly. Lyra gasped and spun around. "Sir, Her voice broke. Tears welled instantly, spilling over as though the dam had already been cracking for weeks. "I didn't want you to know." Rowan looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something unfamiliar tear through him. Guilt. A vampire feeling guilt. For the first time in centuries, Rowan Blackthorne understood what it meant to be full of something other than blood, and how empty he had truly been. Rowan did not sleep when he returned to the estate that night. Sleep, for him, was a voluntary illusion, a way to pass time, not a necessity. But even the ritual of lying still in darkness felt impossible now. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lyra kneeling on that cracked floor, smiling at sick children while her own body cried out in hunger. He heard the way her voice trembled when she said she hadn't wanted him to know. He had lived among humans long enough to recognize selflessness. What he had never learned was how to respond to it. The sun rose slowly over Ashford Ridge, pale light cutting through the tall windows of the mansion. Rowan stood in his study, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the forest. Centuries ago, he would have solved a problem like this with money and distance. Write a check. Walk away. Forget. But something had shifted. Lyra arrived at work at exactly 7, as always. She moved quietly through the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. Rowan watched from the doorway, unseen. She looked tired. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes she hadn't bothered to conceal. "You're early," he said. She startled, nearly dropping the tray. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quickly. "I didn't hear you." "You don't need to apologize," Rowan replied. The silence stretched. Lyra kept her eyes down. "About last night." "You don't need to explain," he interrupted. She looked up then, surprised. Their eyes met, and for a moment Rowan saw fear there, not of him, but of disappointing him. It unsettled him more than any threat ever had. "You were hungry," he continued. "That was not acceptable." Lyra flushed. "It's fine. I'm used to it." Rowan frowned. "You shouldn't be." She hesitated, then gave a small, almost embarrassed laugh. "Sir, people in Lowell Cross have it worse. Missing a meal isn't." "Lyra," he said, gently but firmly. "Enough." She stopped. Rowan turned away, pacing once. "You will eat breakfast. Sit." She opened her mouth to argue, then thought better of it. Slowly, she sat at the kitchen table. Rowan placed a plate in front of her. Not for show, not untouched, but real food. He waited. Her stomach betrayed her immediately. She laughed softly, wiping her eyes. "I guess I'm not bloated after all." Rowan allowed himself the faintest curve of a smile. As she ate, cautiously at first, then with visible relief, Rowan watched her as though committing her to memory. He had observed humans for centuries, but he had never truly looked at one like this. After breakfast, Rowan made a decision. He did not tell Lyra about it. Instead, he called every contact he had in Ashford Ridge. Private doctors, pharmacists, a mobile clinic. He moved quietly, efficiently, like the predator he was, except this hunt was for solutions, not blood. By afternoon, Lowell Cross buzzed with unfamiliar activity. Lyra noticed first. She stopped short when she saw a white van parked near the rundown house. People in scrubs, unloading boxes. Children gathered, curious. A doctor knelt to speak to one coughing boy at eye level. Lyra's heart pounded. She approached cautiously. "Excuse me, what's happening?" "We're setting up a temporary clinic," the woman said kindly. "Free checkups. Free medication." Lyra's breath caught. "Free?" The woman smiled. funded anonymously. Lyra felt dizzy. She backed away, her eyes scanning the street, and then she saw him. Rowan stood across the road, hands in his coat pockets, watching not the clinic, but her. She crossed the street in disbelief. "Did you do this?" she asked. Rowan met her gaze. "You bought medicine with coins," he said simply. "I have more than coins." Lyra's eyes filled again. "You didn't have to. I wanted to." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "This will change everything." Rowan watched as the children laughed, as nurses handed out food, as hope spread like wildfire through the neglected streets. Something inside him, something ancient and starved, ached. For the first time, he stayed. He didn't retreat to the mansion. He walked Lowell Cross with Lyra, listening as she introduced him to families, as she explained who needed what, who had been sick the longest, who pretended to be strong. She knew every name. "You care too much," Rowan said quietly at one point. Lyra smiled. "Someone has to." That night, Rowan returned home changed. He found himself noticing things he had once ignored. The emptiness of rooms, the silence he had mistaken for peace. When Lyra left for the day, the mansion felt hollow. Days passed, then weeks. The clinic became permanent. Clean water systems were installed. Food deliveries arrived weekly. Rowan never took credit. He didn't need gratitude. Watching was enough. Lyra noticed the changes in him before he did. He stayed longer in rooms she was in. Asked questions, not interrogations, but curiosity. What music she liked, where she grew up, what made her laugh. One evening, as they sat on the back steps of the mansion, watching the sky darken, Lyra said softly, "You're different." Rowan looked at her. "So are you." She smiled. "I always was." He laughed, a sound so rare it startled even him. Somewhere between shared silences and quiet conversations, something warm grew between them. Not rushed, not demanded, chosen. Rowan told her the truth one night. Not dramatically, not with fear. "I'm not human," he said. Lyra studied him for a long moment. Then she shrugged lightly. "I figured." He blinked. "You figure? You don't eat. You don't age. And you move like you're listening to the world breathe," she said. "Vampire fits. You're not afraid?" She smiled gently. "You fed a community before you fed yourself. I think that tells me everything I need to know." For the first time in 600 years, Rowan Blackthorne felt something settle into place. Belonging. And though he did not know it yet, this was only the beginning of the redemption he never believed he deserved. Rowan began to notice time again. For centuries, days had blended into one another, an endless stretch of nights punctuated by careful routines and long silences. But now time had edges. Mornings mattered. Afternoons carried weight. Evenings arrived with anticipation instead of relief. It unsettled him. He found himself waking before Lyra arrived, standing by the window as her familiar figure walked up the gravel drive, her bag slung over her shoulder, her steps lighter than they had been weeks ago. She was eating regularly now. He made sure of it, but the habit of watching over others before herself still clung to her like a second skin. Lowell Cross was changing. Fresh paint brightened walls once gray with neglect. The clinic had expanded into 2 renovated buildings. Children who had once coughed through conversations now raced each other down the street, their laughter sharp and alive. Rowan funded it all quietly, but Lyra guided everything, organizing schedules, checking on families, advocating fiercely when supplies ran low. She had become the heartbeat of the community, and Rowan had become something else entirely. He started going with her openly, no longer hiding in shadows. At first, the residents of Lowell Cross eyed him warily, his tailored coats, his pale complexion, the way he seemed out of place among chipped sidewalks and folding chairs. But Lyra introduced him simply. "This is Rowan," she said. "He's helping." That was enough. Rowan found himself sitting on plastic chairs too small for him, listening to stories of resilience and quiet despair. He learned which families needed generators, which children feared needles, which elders pretended not to hurt. He listened, not as an immortal observer, but as a participant. One afternoon, while helping unload boxes of donated books, Rowan paused. A small boy, no more than 6, stood in front of him, staring openly. "Why are you so cold?" the boy asked. Lyra froze. Rowan crouched slowly, meeting the child's eye level. "Some people are just built that way," he said carefully. The boy considered this, then shrugged. "That's okay. You still help." Something twisted warmly in Rowan's chest. That night, back at the mansion, Rowan lingered in the kitchen while Lyra prepared tea. The space felt different now. Less like a workplace, more like a shared room. "You didn't have to come today," Lyra said, handing him a mug he didn't need but accepted anyway. "I wanted to," Rowan replied. She studied him. "You always say that now." He met her gaze. "It's true." Silence settled. Not awkward, but full. "Why did you really follow me that night?" Lyra asked suddenly. Rowan didn't pretend not to understand. "Because you lied." She winced. "I'm sorry." "I know," he said, "but I needed to know why." Lyra sat across from him, wrapping her hands around her mug. "I grew up like that," she said softly. "Communities that get forgotten. Kids that get sick and learn early not to complain. When I finally had steady work, I couldn't ignore it." Rowan listened intently. "I told myself hunger was temporary," she continued. "But if I'm honest, sometimes it scared me. Not eating, being tired all the time. I just didn't want anyone to look at me with pity." Rowan's voice was low. "I didn't pity you." She looked up. "I admired you," he said. Her breath caught. From that moment, something shifted, subtly, dangerously. They stood closer than necessary. Their conversations stretched longer. Rowan found himself laughing more easily, smiling without calculation. And yet, fear crept in. Rowan had survived by keeping distance. Attachment had always led to loss. Humans aged. Humans died. Loving them meant watching time take everything away. He began to pull back. Lyra noticed. "You've been distant," she said one evening as they locked up the clinic together. Rowan hesitated. "I'm busy." She raised an eyebrow. "You're terrible at lying." He almost smiled. Almost. Weeks passed with unspoken tension hanging between them. The community flourished, but something fragile frayed. Rowan returned earlier to the mansion. Lyra stayed later in Lowell Cross. One night, Rowan stood alone in his study, gripping the edge of his desk hard enough to splinter wood. "This is why you don't love," he told himself. Yet the thought of losing Lyra hurt more than centuries of solitude ever had. The breaking point came unexpectedly. A late-night call. An emergency at the clinic. A child's fever spiking dangerously. Rowan arrived before Lyra, moving faster than any human could. When she burst through the doors minutes later, breathless and frantic, she froze when she saw him already there, holding the child gently, speaking calmly to the doctor. "You came," she whispered. "Of course," Rowan said. The child stabilized. Relief washed through the room. Lyra stepped outside, her hands shaking, the weight of responsibility crashing down all at once. Rowan followed. She broke. "I can't lose them," she said, tears spilling freely now. "I try so hard, but sometimes it feels like it's never enough." Rowan reached for her, then stopped. The old rule screamed in his mind. Don't attach. Don't promise what time will steal. But he was tired of rules written in fear. He pulled her into his arms. Lyra stiffened for a heartbeat, then melted against him, sobbing quietly. Rowan held her, careful, reverent, as though she were something precious and fragile. "I'm here," he said softly. "You don't carry this alone anymore." She looked up at him, eyes red, searching. "Are you sure?" "Yes." And in that moment, Rowan realized something terrifying and beautiful. He wasn't afraid of losing her anymore. He was afraid of never truly choosing her. If you were Rowan, would you risk centuries of safety for one person who makes the world feel alive again? Or would you walk away before love has the chance to hurt? What would you do and why? The question lingered in the quiet night air, unanswered. Lyra stepped back slowly, wiping her cheeks. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." Rowan watched her walk away, his heart pounding, not with hunger, but with hope and fear tangled together. He knew now, the next step would change everything, and there would be no turning back. Rowan made a decision the following morning, one that felt heavier than any vow he had ever sworn. He would stop hiding, not from the world, Ashford Ridge did not need to know what he was, but from Lyra, from himself, from the quiet terror that had ruled his existence for centuries. Love, he had learned, was not a sudden lightning strike. It was a slow erosion of walls you had once believed indestructible. And his walls were crumbling. The change was subtle at first. Rowan began rearranging his schedule around Lowell Cross instead of the other way around. Meetings were canceled without explanation. Long-standing investments were delegated. He spent afternoons at the community center, sleeves rolled up, listening more than he spoke. The residents no longer watched him with suspicion. They waved. They smiled. Some even teased him. "You don't look so scary today, Mr. Rowan," an elderly woman said one afternoon, handing him a paper cup of lemonade. "I'll try harder next time," he replied dryly. Lyra laughed, the sound light and surprised, and Rowan found himself replaying it in his mind long after the moment passed. Yet beneath the growing warmth, tension simmered. Lyra felt it too. She noticed the way Rowan watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. Not with hunger, not with ownership, but with something deeper and more vulnerable. She noticed the pauses in his speech, the restraint in his movements when he stood too close. He was holding himself back. One evening, after a long day organizing medical records, Lyra found Rowan alone in the clinic's small storage room, staring at a box of supplies as if it held answers. "You're avoiding me," she said gently. Rowan turned. "I'm trying not to burden you." She frowned. "By disappearing?" He exhaled slowly. "By wanting more than I should." Silence filled the narrow room, thick and electric. Lyra stepped closer. "Rowan, you don't get to decide what I can handle." His jaw tightened. "I'm not safe," he said quietly. "Not for you. Not in the long run." She searched his face. "You're not talking about being a vampire." "No," he admitted. "I'm talking about time. I stay. You change. I stay again." Lyra's voice softened. "You don't know that." "I do," he said. "I've lived it." She reached out before he could retreat, placing her hand over his, warm, steady, human. He stiffened, then slowly relaxed. "Maybe," she said, "you don't get to decide the ending alone." Rowan looked at their joined hands as if seeing them for the first time. That night, he returned to the mansion restless, pacing rooms that suddenly felt too large. Memories surfaced uninvited, faces he had loved once, voices long gone, promises broken by time itself. He had survived them all by hardening his heart. But Lyra had never asked him to promise forever. She had only asked him to stay. The next crisis arrived without warning. A funding issue, a bureaucratic delay. Medicine shipments held up indefinitely. Lowell Cross teetered on the edge of losing everything they had gained. Rowan's response was immediate and ruthless. He confronted city officials, pulled favors he hadn't used in decades, leveraged influence with precision and cold authority. His voice carried a power that made people listen without understanding why. Lyra watched him work, stunned. This was not the quiet, reserved man she knew. This was something older, sharper, dangerous in a way that protected rather than consumed. "You didn't have to do all that," she said later, when the crisis had passed. Rowan met her gaze. "I did. For me. For them," he said. Then, after a pause, "And for you." That night, they walked Lowell Cross together under broken streetlights and clear stars. The air felt charged, as though the world itself was holding its breath. "Why now?" Lyra asked suddenly. "Why change after so long?" Rowan considered the question carefully. "Because I forgot what it felt like to matter," he said. "And you reminded me." She stopped walking. "So what happens next?" she asked. Rowan turned to her fully, the city quiet around them. "Next, I stop pretending I don't want this." Lyra's breath hitched. "This?" He stepped closer, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the coolness of him, the restraint vibrating beneath the surface. "You," he said. The moment stretched, fragile and terrifying. Lyra smiled softly. "You're terrible at half-steps, Rowan Blackthorne." "I've never learned moderation," he replied. She closed the distance. The kiss was gentle, tentative, not rushed, not consuming. Just two people acknowledging what had been inevitable for weeks. Rowan felt warmth bloom where there should have been none, a steady pulse of something dangerously close to happiness. When they pulled back, Lyra rested her forehead against his. "We'll figure it out," she whispered. Rowan nodded, something easing inside him for the first time in centuries. But fate, as always, was listening. From across the street, unseen eyes watched the pair beneath the streetlight. A man in a dark coat lowered his phone after snapping a photo. Rowan's pale face unmistakable even in low light, his expression unguarded. "Found you," the man murmured. The past had not forgotten Rowan Blackthorne, and it was coming closer. Rowan sensed it before he saw it. The unease crept into his awareness like a cold draft through a sealed room. Subtle, almost ignorable, yet impossible to dismiss once noticed. It followed him through the mansion halls, lingered during his visits to Lowell Cross, and tightened whenever Lyra laughed too freely beside him. Centuries of survival had taught him one truth above all others. Danger rarely announced itself. It observed. It waited. The photograph surfaced 3 days later. Rowan was in his study when his phone vibrated, a private line that hadn't been used in years. He stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "You're slipping," came the voice on the other end. Smooth, familiar, unwelcome. Rowan closed his eyes. "You're a long way from relevance," he said calmly. A soft chuckle. "And yet here we are." The message arrived seconds later. A photo, grainy but unmistakable. Rowan under a streetlight in Lowell Cross. His expression open, human, Lyra close enough that their intimacy was undeniable. Rowan's jaw tightened. "What do you want?" he asked. "Conversation," the man replied. "And perhaps a reminder. You don't disappear from our world just because you grow fond of theirs." The line went dead. Rowan stood very still. He had severed ties decades ago, burned bridges, erased trails, buried identities. He had believed himself forgotten. He had been wrong. That evening, Lyra noticed the change immediately. "You're distracted," she said as they sorted supplies at the clinic. "And not in your usual brooding way." Rowan forced a smile. "I didn't realize I had categories." She crossed her arms. "You do. Talk to me." He hesitated. The instinct to protect, to withhold, rose sharply. But he remembered her words. "No half-steps. Someone from my past reached out," he said carefully. Her brow furrowed. "Someone dangerous?" "Yes." She didn't flinch. "To us." He paused. "Potentially." Lyra exhaled slowly, then nodded. "Okay, then we deal with it." The simplicity of her response stunned him. "You don't know what you're agreeing to," Rowan said quietly. "I know who I'm standing with," she replied. "That's enough." Rowan felt something in his chest ease and ache all at once. The next few days were tense. Rowan increased security around the mansion and the clinic, not overtly, but enough to deter casual intrusion. He never left Lyra alone after dark. She noticed. She didn't complain. But Lowell Cross noticed too. "Everything okay?" one of the volunteers asked after spotting unfamiliar cars parked nearby. "Just precautions," Lyra said lightly. "Nothing to worry about." Rowan wished that were true. The confrontation came sooner than expected. It happened on a rain-soaked evening, the kind that blurred edges and muffled sound. Rowan and Lyra were locking up the clinic when a figure stepped out from the shadows beneath the awning. "Well," the man said pleasantly. "You clean up nicely, Rowan." Lyra stiffened. Rowan stepped subtly in front of her. "Leave," Rowan said. The man smiled, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. He was pale, sharp-featured, eyes too old for his face. "I'd rather talk," he replied. "You owe me that much." Lyra glanced between them. "Rowan, go inside," Rowan said quietly. "No," she said just as quietly. "I'm staying." The man's gaze flicked to her, interest sharpening. So this is the complication." Rowan's voice dropped dangerously. "You don't get to look at her." The man laughed softly, still possessive. "Some things never change." Lyra squared her shoulders. "Who are you?" The man tipped his hat. "Silas Hartman, old acquaintance." Rowan said nothing, but Lyra felt the tension radiating from him. "Silas belongs to a faction that prefers vampires invisible and compliant," Rowan said finally. "They don't appreciate deviation." Silas sighed theatrically. You always did have a flair for understatement. What do you want? Lyra asked, cutting through the posturing. Silas studied her openly. You've inspired quite the transformation. Clinics, community projects, public presence. It's sloppy. Lyra bristled. People are getting help. If that's sloppy, it's dangerous, Silas interrupted. For him, and now for you. Rowan's control snapped. In one fluid movement, he was inches from Silas, strength coiled and lethal. You will not threaten her. Silas didn't flinch. I'm warning you. There are others watching. Curiosity spreads. Rowan leaned in, then let them watch. For a moment, the rain was the only sound. Silas stepped back, hands raised. Very well. I've delivered the message. His gaze lingered on Lyra. Be careful who you love. And then he was gone, melting into the night as if he had never been there. Lyra let out a shaky breath. That was unsettling. Rowan turned to her, regret heavy in his eyes. I'm sorry. I never wanted this to touch you. She reached for his hand. Rowan, listen to me. Whatever you are, whoever you were, I'm here now. You don't get to decide this alone. He squeezed her hand gently. I don't want to lose you. Then don't, she said simply. The following weeks tested that resolve. Rumors surfaced. Inspections. Questions from city officials. Nothing overt, just pressure. Subtle attempts to slow progress, to create doubt. Rowan countered each one methodically, using influence without revealing too much. Lyra became his anchor. When frustration threatened to harden him again, she reminded him why he fought. When fear whispered that loving her was a mistake, she proved otherwise with quiet resilience and unwavering trust. One night, after a particularly exhausting day, they sat on the mansion's back terrace, wrapped in blankets, watching the rain fade into mist. Are you afraid? Lyra asked softly. Rowan considered the question. Yes, he admitted, but not of them. She smiled faintly. Good. He turned to her. I'm afraid of becoming the man I was before you. She took his face in her hands, warm against his cool skin. Then don't go back. Their kiss that night was deeper, surer, a promise without words. But beyond the estate walls, plans were forming. Silas Hartman stood beneath flickering lights in a warehouse miles away, phone pressed to his ear. He's in love, Silas said. That's the leverage. A pause. Yes, he continued. I know the risks. Another pause, longer this time. Silas smiled thinly. Prepare the board. If Rowan Blackthorne wants to play human, let's remind him what monsters lose. The call ended, and as the storm clouds gathered once more over Ashford Ridge, Rowan felt it, an approaching reckoning that would demand more than money, more than secrecy. It would demand a choice between the past that refused to let him go and the future he was finally brave enough to want. The quiet before dawn carried a tension Rowan had not felt in centuries. Lowell Cross slept under the blanket of early morning mist, unaware that their fragile hope was about to be tested. Rowan stood at the edge of the estate's terrace, watching the streets below, every sense alert. Silas Hartman's presence lingered like a shadow he could not shake, and Rowan knew the man would return, stronger, bolder, with intentions far darker than mere observation. Lyra arrived shortly after, carrying a basket of breakfast for the children. She had a lightness in her step that betrayed nothing of the anxiety Rowan had felt creeping over him these past weeks. But when she saw him standing so still, so tense, she slowed, her brow furrowing. You've been standing there for hours, she said softly. I could feel it, Rowan replied. Something is coming. Lyra tilted her head, eyes sharp. Are you saying someone is after us? Yes, Rowan said. He did not elaborate. The words, someone after you, could not encompass the storm gathering in the undercurrent of his existence. He had survived centuries, evaded hunters, and outlived empires. But he had never had to protect someone like her. Not someone human, soft, unshielded in every way that mattered. Then we need a plan, she said, placing the basket down and rolling up her sleeves. Whatever comes, we face it together. Rowan exhaled slowly, a rare vulnerability in the cool morning air. He wanted to tell her not to worry, to assure her that he could handle anything, but words felt hollow. Actions had weight. Actions save lives. And he had learned, painfully, that promises alone meant nothing. The first strike came in the form of subtle interference. A shipment of medical supplies intended for Lowell Cross was delayed. The truck's engine broke down conveniently miles from the city. A call to the clinic's administrator revealed that paperwork had been mysteriously lost. Rowan's instincts told him this was no coincidence. Someone was testing boundaries, probing weaknesses. He accompanied Lyra that day, moving through the clinic with a presence both protective and watchful. He noticed every nervous glance, every hesitant footstep from volunteers who sensed tension without knowing its source. Lyra moved beside him, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the rising anxiety in Rowan's chest. He marveled at her courage, the same courage that had first drawn him out of centuries of detachment. That evening, Rowan and Lyra walked through the narrow alleys of Lowell Cross, checking on families and delivering supplies personally. Children waved from windows. Mothers offered small smiles of gratitude. The neighborhood seemed alive with optimism, unaware of the looming threat. "Rowan," Lyra said after a pause, her voice soft but steady, "we can't let fear dictate our lives. If we give in to it, what happens to everyone here?" He looked at her, every line of her face illuminated by the fading streetlight. "You're right," he admitted. "But you must understand, what's coming won't be easy to face." Lyra smiled faintly, placing a hand on his arm. "Then we face it together. Isn't that what you've been teaching me?" He felt warmth surge through him, a rare, human-like comfort that made the icy control of his vampire nature momentarily melt. She had become his anchor, the one thing that tethered him to the present and reminded him why he had emerged from isolation. Days passed, and the attacks grew bolder. Supplies disappeared, volunteers were subtly intimidated, and cryptic messages were left at the edges of the community. Rowan handled each incident with precision, quietly neutralizing threats while ensuring Lyra and the residents remained unaware of the danger they had narrowly skirted. Then came the night that tested everything. Rowan and Lyra were closing the clinic when a car skidded into the lot, headlights cutting through the darkness. Figures emerged, 3 men, coordinated, dangerous, moving with intent. Rowan stepped forward, his body taut, senses heightened. He could smell the adrenaline, the fear masked by bravado, and the faint metallic scent that told him they were armed. "Lyra," he said, voice low, "go inside. Now." "I'm not leaving you," she whispered, standing firm. Rowan's gaze softened, a rare vulnerability passing through his otherwise impenetrable exterior. "I can't let you get hurt." "Go." Lyra hesitated, then nodded. She slipped into the building, closing the door behind her. Rowan faced the men, and the air seemed to thicken, charged with an invisible electricity. "You've been busy," the tallest man said, voice mocking. "Saving the weak, feeding the children. Foolish Blackthorn." Rowan's lips curved into a thin smile. Better foolish than cruel. A fight ensued, not like the chaotic brawls of human confrontations, but a deadly dance of precision. Rowan moved with the speed and strength of centuries, neutralizing threats before they could act. Every strike was deliberate, every movement controlled, yet merciful enough to leave them alive, a warning rather than execution. When the dust settled, Rowan was standing in the rain-soaked lot, rain mingling with the faint traces of fear he had expelled from the intruders. He could feel Lyra's presence behind him, tense, silent. "You didn't tell me it would be like this," she said softly. "I wanted to protect you," he replied. "But now you know. This is the life surrounding what we've built. The world will not allow innocence to thrive unchallenged." Lyra stepped closer, placing a hand against his chest. "Then we protect it together," she said. Rowan looked down at her, the reality of his emotions overwhelming centuries of disciplined detachment. For the first time, he acknowledged it fully. He did not simply care for her. He loved her. Every protective instinct, every desire to shield her, every sleepless night spent watching over Lowell Cross was proof. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. "Then we face whatever comes side by side," he said, And at that moment, as the first hints of dawn broke through the clouds, Rowan realized that his life, long, lonely, and defined by restraint, had finally found its purpose. Lyra Belmont was no longer just a maid. She was his anchor, his light, and the reason he would fight with everything he had to ensure that the people she cared for would never have to suffer again. The storm was not over. Rowan knew it never would be. But for the first time, he no longer feared facing it alone. The morning after the confrontation, Lowell Cross awoke to a calm it hadn't known in weeks. Children played in the streets, their laughter echoing off freshly painted walls. The clinic buzzed with activity, volunteers moving efficiently, and the scent of warm bread and coffee drifted from community kitchens. Rowan stood at the edge of the lot, watching it all unfold, a quiet satisfaction stirring in his chest. Lyra appeared beside him, holding a basket of supplies for the families she visited daily. Her hair was tied back neatly, sunlight catching the strands, her skin glowing with warmth. She glanced at him, a gentle smile tugging at her lips. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "All of this, we did it." Rowan nodded, his usual composure softened by the scene before him. "You did it," he corrected gently. "I only helped." She shook her head, stepping closer. "No, Rowan. You saved lives. You protected us. You made this possible. I couldn't have done it alone." For a moment, they simply stood there, letting the weight of their accomplishments and their connection settle between them. Rowan's eyes scanned the streets, the families, the children who had once been frail and sick, now running with energy and laughter. His centuries of isolation had never shown him such fulfillment. He turned to Lyra, the quiet intensity in his gaze making her heart skip. "I thought I knew what I wanted," he said, voice low. "Centuries of survival taught me to protect myself first. But I realize now all I ever wanted was this." Lyra's eyes softened. This, he said, reaching for her hand. "You, the community, this life we've built together. I don't care about hiding anymore. I don't care about rules or fear. I care about you and them, and every day I get to spend ensuring both flourish." Her smile widened, a mixture of relief and love shining through. "Rowan," she whispered. The first of the community members approached, a small girl holding a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked from the lot. "For you," she said, shyly offering it to Lyra. "Thank you for helping us." Rowan knelt beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "She didn't do it alone," he said, nodding toward Lyra. The girl's eyes widened at him, the pale, striking figure who had watched over them quietly, and she beamed. Later that day, Rowan walked through Lowell Cross, side by side with Lyra, as families waved and children ran past, calling out greetings. Volunteers shared smiles of gratitude, and even local officials who had once doubted the community's revival nodded respectfully. Rowan realized then that his presence, once a secret, had become a source of reassurance. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the restored streets, Rowan and Lyra reached the edge of the community, standing together on a small hill overlooking the neighborhood. The wind rustled softly, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and hope. "I never thought I'd find peace like this," Rowan said quietly. "Not in centuries." Lyra leaned against him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. "You found it because you let yourself care," she said. "Because you stopped running from what matters." Rowan inhaled deeply, letting the warmth of her presence fill him. "And you," he said softly, "you taught me how." They remained there, silent, watching the community thrive, the sun dipping low over Ashford Ridge. The hardships, the threats, the shadows of his past, they all seemed distant now, pushed back by the light they had nurtured together. Rowan felt something he had long thought impossible, a sense of belonging, of home, of life filled with purpose. Finally, he turned to Lyra, eyes bright with uncharacteristic emotion. "I don't want to waste another century without you by my side," he confessed. "Will you stay with me? Not just here, but anywhere I am." Lyra smiled, the warmth in her eyes matching the golden light around them. "Yes, Rowan, Always. He took her hand, holding it tightly, then pressed a gentle kiss to her palm, the first of many small, tender moments that would define their life together. From that day forward, Rowan and Lyra became more than protector and helper, more than vampire and human. They became a team, a family, a force for good. Rowan's presence in Lowell Cross brought stability, while Lyra's compassion ensured that hope would continue to grow. The community flourished, children thrived, and their love became the quiet heartbeat of a neighborhood reborn. Centuries of isolation and survival had led Rowan to this moment. And for the first time, he felt full, not with blood, but with life, love, and the shared triumph of a world they had healed together. As night fell and the first stars twinkled above Ashford Ridge, Rowan held Lyra close, whispering softly, "We made it. Together." Lyra smiled against him. Yes, together. And in that perfect quiet, the vampire and his maid finally found what both had been searching for all along: each other and a home worth protecting. The world had not changed entirely. Shadows would return, challenges would rise, but Rowan and Lyra knew one undeniable truth. Together, they could face anything. And so, with hearts intertwined and hope restored, their story ended not in darkness, but in light, love, and the laughter of a community forever changed by courage, kindness, and a bond stronger than eternity itself. The end. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you'll surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.